So the greenhouse metaphor came about because my co-founder and I used to talk about, as leaders, we want to grow greenhouses, build the conditions so that others can grow. That's our job. But what I was forgotten in that whole belief, and what I realized during the writing of the book, is that we forget to nurture our greenhouse first.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Take Two podcast. This week, we have global workplace expert and best-selling author of Beyond Happiness, Jenn Lim, joining us. You know, it's interesting because we talk to so many people, and these days, nobody really wants, and I'm doing this in quotes unquotes, if you were to see me, a job. Right. Instead, people are looking for purpose and for meaning and for fulfillment when it comes to their life at work and their work life. But here's the problem. Over 70% of employees are disengaged with their work. And yet workplace culture is more critical than ever. So this is why we brought Jenn Lim to the show today. She is the CEO and co-founder of Delivering Happiness, a company that she and Tony Hsieh, the late CEO of Zappos, co-founded in order to show you how you can prioritize purpose, people, and profits in order to make an impact on the world. I think Jenn's mission is something, honestly, that is both simple and profound. She teaches businesses how to cultivate cultures that generate profit and sustain all people at every level of an organization, and then shares how we can make an impact by being true to our authentic selves. So coming into this conversation, Rickis and I talked a lot, and we thought, gosh, it's so hard to be and sustain being happy all the time. Like, is that something that we can in fact do? Can we in fact always be happy? But this conversation shifted gears, and it taught me so much about what it means to embrace the highs and lows in life, which we all go through. And we talk about how moments are fulfilling and meaningful when you're living according to your purpose and values. So if you're interested in adopting the principles that Jenn used to take Zappos, get this, from $0 to $2 billion, you are absolutely going to enjoy and love this episode as she shares with you not only her knowledge and experience, but she gives you recommendations and practices that are both practical and tangible, and you can implement right away in order to create an engaged workforce and a fulfilling workplace culture. Let's take two. Really excited to have you. You know, you have this amazing career. You've obviously achieved so much. Wall Street bestselling author, and I would say happiness evangelist. And we will unpack all that today. But I want to open up this conversation in a little bit of a different manner than what we normally would. And you hear about purpose and the why and the burn. And I think all of those things are, number one, super valid and very interesting. But I'm a big believer in superpowers. So I always talk about these like innate superpowers that we have. It might be one, it might be multiple, but I would love to hear, or for you to share, what is Jenn Lim's superpower?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Like you said, I feel like everyone has a multitude of them, that it's like a toolbox. You can kind of rummage through it and find the one that might be really applicable at the time. Are you a fan of the Avatar series? Did you watch Avatar?
Yes, we did.
So you know how they greet each other. It's like, I see you. I feel like that resonated with me a lot in terms of where my superpower lies. It's just being able to see someone, especially those that are not seen on a typical and kind of like a traditional sense. So I think I really get into that part of me that really wants to hear and understand. And I just believe people just want to be heard and understood, especially now. I mean, given all the crap that's happened in the last few years, we lost a lot, of autonomy. We lost a lot of freedom. So I've been really trying to relish that side of people and me being able to connect to that, of being able to see who they are truly, authentically inside.
Yeah, I think that's so important, is that being seen and being listened to, right? Just staying from heard, but really being listened to and really gotten by. So I love that. And I'm sure that it has informed so much of your career trajectory, which I think is really interesting. So I'd love for you to share with us, where it all started from you. You can go back to childhood if you want to, and how you ended up really where you did, what those key milestones were, because I would imagine you've had to pivot and re-navigate at different points in your life.
Oh, yeah. So, gosh, where to start? I guess, because my company is called Delivering Happiness, people don't really like have preconceived notions of like, oh, this person must be happy all the time. And I was on the opposite end. I was totally reading books like existentialism and just kind of like a cynic growing up. And it wasn't until I realized there was this whole field of scientific happiness and positive psychology that kind of made me consider different paths. But I would say one of the biggest pivots, knowing that I was so heady, everything was like I had to analyze everything in my mind, in my head, in my life. And then realizing all those things that I put so much value in didn't mean that much anymore. And specifically, there were three things, those trifecta that happened not too long after I graduated from college. I went to Cal, go Bears, if there's any fans.
But sorry.
Yeah, so it was a series. I was a .com baby, so woohoo, money, title, status. It was so easy, and I got to prove my parents wrong. Even though I majored in Asian American studies, I got to make something out of my life. But I got spit out of that. I got laid off, and then 9/11 happened, and then all within about the same year, my dad was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. So that trifecta made me really understand, like, I was pursuing and prioritizing the things that I think meant so much, but didn't mean that much at all, money, title, status. So from that period going forward, I realized, look, I've got it all wrong and I need to prioritize different things. So that's how I stumbled on scientific happiness and positive psychology. And that's when I met Tony, Tony Hsieh, who was my co-founder of Delivering Happiness, and he was the CEO of Zappos. And then realized there's this whole new world of how we can look at what life can be, especially at work. Like, who talked about being happy at work? It was like insane, and realizing, look, it's just too short to think otherwise of how we actually spend our time in the day and how to prioritize it in a way that's most meaningful to us. That was a big pivot towards eventually Delivering Happiness, and now the book that you mentioned, Beyond Happiness, and really making sense of, from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep, the goal isn't to be happy, and it's not realistic. That's just not how life is. But what is it then? And I think that's where I'm continue to be curious about, and where my work is, to help not just organizations and companies do their thing and make more money. It's like, what's really actually more intrinsically important to us as human beings and living in it.
Yeah, I think that's so good. One of the things that you pointed to, and I actually was thinking about this as I was preparing for this, is you talk about this money, title, status thing, right, in the beginning of your career. And for us, we have this conversation about the one day win syndrome all the time, chasing the big paycheck. And one day when I get the executive title, and one day when I get the status. But in our experience, it's like when you finally achieve it, you very rarely feel any type of fulfillment. And then the other side of it is like, if you never achieve it, for those people chasing it, there's this huge void that exists. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, was that something that when you started your career initially, because of the expectations that you pointed to that your parents had on you, was that something that attracted you from the beginning?
Yeah, it did, for sure. I think it's because there wasn't an awareness that it was just a social norm, that was just something you're supposed to do. But at the end of the day, now that I've learned a lot and growing in ways that I understand why there was a social norm. I understand why my parents were so hard on me, because look, they freaking gave up their life and traveled to a new world, and, all these risks they took, now we're gifted with it. And I talk about all generations are basically benefiting from all the risks, sacrifices that people made in the past. So yeah, I think because we wanted to live up to that, because we want to say, hey, I thank you for this, then we get into that social norm. But then we start realizing at the end of the day, we all do that because we just want to feel loved. We want to feel part of the society. We want to feel like we belong. Things that are so important, especially right now. So then I realized this vicious cycle we get into of, when I get that raise, I'll be happy. Did it happen? No. When I get that X, Y, Z, will I be happy? And we see this in, studies of lottery winners. We now know, their happiness levels stay the same, if not go down over time. So being on that hamster wheel is not fun and it gets tiring. So that's when I realized, like, wait, there must be something more that can ground ourselves. The vicious cycle of these goals will always be there unless we have a better sense of who we are and what means the most. When we talk about purpose, we talk about values. And sometimes people kind of like roll their eyes like, come on, can we really talk about that right now? I'm just trying to get, food on the table, and I'm just trying to keep my job and not get laid off. But the reality is, yes, we can talk about it because the most important thing is understanding what it means to you.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, for my sins, I love studying words, so you look at the word happy, it comes from the word hap. In the Middle English meant luck, happy and lucky kind of connected. And that's why, people can be happy, even if they're lucky, you'll be happy, but it's short-lived. It's like a sugar boost, and then suddenly that's gone. I heard this amazing speech the other day about a valedictorian student stood up and he talked about the first 15 seconds of happiness when he realized that he got this award, and then the 16th second happened. So where suddenly you realize, well, nothing's changed. I'm still the same person. Still have the same issue that I'm dealing with, and now I'm stuck, because I'm not happy anymore. And to me, is that, to your point, is that either you're happy, unhappy, or chasing being happy. Those states, the happy piece can be very fleeting. And, I think it'd be great to understand. So I understand the values and the purpose piece, but I wonder if it's not something else that we should be chasing. Maybe it's fulfillment, something that is more connected to work and, working towards something bigger than who you are as a person, and wanting to achieve something that is just larger. Maybe it's more focusing on other people rather than yourself. I'd love your insights and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's important to revisit what happiness is and to actually think through how we define it. And some people think of it as this fleeting moment. And it's interesting because when I heard, you use the word chase, and it's something that, well, are we really trying to chase, something like this? Like when our forefathers said pursuit of happiness, they actually didn't mean we're chasing it. Pursuit back in the day, contextually, actually meant to be in it. So I think it's important to define that the happiness can be this moment, but instead of seeing, like, imagine like, heartbeats on a heart monitor. The happiness isn't just that high you hit. It's actually the whole graph of those highs and those lows as a whole continuum of the sense of like, what your life is. So I would zoom out in happiness and being able to say it's the lifetime of those highs and lows that actually make up the sense of whether we are happy or whether we are fulfilled or whether we are on the other side of the scale. So I think that gives a more accurate representation instead of like trying to hit those highs every time, which again is impossible or realistic. But the notion that sustainable happiness, and this goes back to the science and goes all the way back to the, Aristotle and Socrates, they had tons of time to think about this stuff, but it goes back to that sense of meaning. If you don't like the word purpose, just think about, what is it that I am a part of that's bigger than me? What is it that I belong in that's bigger than me? And a sense of authenticity. And that authenticity coupled with that higher purpose is what bundled up into that fuller heart monitor of the life we live. And so I think those are the two biggest things to remember as we revisit what actually happiness means, especially since the world got 2020. Life has changed, but how have we?
So true. And I'd love, number one, I guess this question's twofold. Number one, what is your purpose? What do you believe your purpose is? And then for some people, and it's interesting because when I first met Rickus, he asked me what my purpose was. And Jenn, in full transparency, I had no idea. It was like the most confronting conversation because I truly did not know what my purpose was. And it was almost as if like talking about belonging, I didn't belong because I didn't have a purpose. And so, what would you say, number one, not only is what your purpose is, but what is like that alternative approach for people who may not have been able to define their purpose? And if they haven't defined their purpose, are they still able to go through life and be happy?
Yeah, a lot of layers in that question. So let me take that one by one. Number one, I totally feel you because, I have a lot of conversations about this purpose topic, and sometimes it's so daunting. It's kind of like, ooh, like you're not part of that purpose club. But it's like reality is I've met so many people that haven't really defined succinctly and have it, on their wall or whatever, what that purpose is, but yet they're happy because there's an intrinsic sense of meaning and fulfillment. So I think for those that like are kind of maybe wondering or struggling, there can be more practical ways to go about it. So sometimes if someone's like, I have no idea what it is, I'm like, it's okay, because let's just go through these 3 questions real quick. Off the top of your head, this is meant for what's coming up from inside. Number 1, what is the light that fires you up? And it doesn't have to be like positive light. Like what's firing up, like what's pissing you off in the world right now? Like so whatever it is that's bringing some energy out of you. Number 1, then we answer that. Number 2, what are your talents? Of course, what you good at, but also what are talents that people see in you that you don't actually not necessarily see yet either. And then the last one is what's the impact? And when I say impact, it's not about what are you going to do to change the world? And like, that's just too big. And there's too much pressure on that. But it's more of like, what is the impact you want to make on your world? So if you answer those 3 questions, you have no idea what your purpose statement is yet. Those 3 questions, those 3 answers can formulate your first draft one. And the thing about purpose is to remember, it's not static. It changes as you change. It changes as the world has changed. And I think of it more as an evolutionary one. So I think when you think about it that way and you're more curious about your purpose, then it's less of this huge burden of like, oh man, I don't have a North Star. What am I going to do? It's like, it's okay. What are those things that light you up? What's the impact you want to make? And what is it that, the core of who you are that feels good and passionate and talented at? So I think that's how it can evolve over time.
Yeah, I think it's great. And it simplifies it because so often, like you said, we get so stuck on like, we're not a part of this purpose club, and it really simplifies it. And I mean, I know we also had this conversation when we were preparing for this, is you take this in the organizational context. I mean, Rickis will be able to talk into this way better than I can because of his work in running mining companies and Fortune 50 companies in that industry. But how is it that you create this collective purpose? Because not everybody in a 20,000 person organization is going to say, I'm so passionate about, this area of my life and I'm going to show up at work passionate. Right. So yeah. How do you manage that in these larger complex organizations?
I love the fact that you're thinking about this for 20,000 people in a mining company, because the first thing that comes to mind sometimes are like, yeah, those frontliners, they're not thinking about their purpose. Like I've worked with hospital systems. There's one in upstate New York, 85,000 employees. The custodian's not thinking about purpose, but maybe the doctors and the nurses are. But the reality is we don't have to say, hey, custodian, what's your purpose? It's asking and prompting in the right way of like, what is it about this job that means something to you? And connecting the higher purpose of your organization, because you're not just a mining company, right? You do something more than making money. What is it that? And connecting it to the individual purpose of that person. As an example of this custodian in this hospital system, like what he loved doing was just being able, like one of his jobs was just to clean patients' rooms. And people were like, what's the purpose in that? But what was really cool, one day there was a patient and he was at the end of his days and he was interviewed after, and he was asked, what was your favorite part of your day? And this is the final, days of his life. And he said it was the custodian. And he's like, why? He's like, because every single day he knew I loved the Mets. And he brought me a sports section and we just had a conversation. And that was his favorite part of this visit towards his last day. And the custodian was just like, well, that's why I do what I do. It's like not the, nuts and bolts of saving lives. It's like, I made an impact on this person's life. So I think that's where the beauty of purpose comes in for any organization, is just to prompt that question. What is it that means more to you than even yourself? How do you prioritize and want to prioritize your days? And so I think that's what makes it more of a question that makes everyone feel like they can belong, because everyone will have an answer for that no matter what. And that's when the alignment happens with the greater needs of the organization. And that's when the magic happens, because people are showing up beyond their paycheck because they know they're feeling cared for and they know their purpose is being appreciated and embraced.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And there's so many case studies about Zappos and what you guys did there to, bring happiness into the business. But I'd love to hear from you what you believe the most impactful actions were that you took, or programs that you implemented.
Ooh, there was so many over the time. I think as a whole, because, this was back in the day in the early 2000s, and culture was not a term yet. It wasn't a buzzword yet. It was just like, how do we want to make people show up and actually be there, to hang out with friends instead of like colleagues? And so I think that's, from a broad brush, the most important thing we took was, hey, we know we need to make profits, but we don't have to remind everyone every day. What we do want to create is an environment of people like, I just want to show up. I don't want to hit that snooze button. And how do we do that? And so I think the biggest thing we learned is we took the science, like this body of knowledge of scientific happiness, and actually tested it, in real ways. Like one of the programs was paying people to quit. And I think that was like still being talked about in business schools, because like, why would you pay people to quit? And it's like, well, this is the thing. During the time people would get trained, they're offered pretty handsome sum of money to quit at any time if they don't want to adopt the purpose and values of Zappos. It said nothing personal or anything like that. We understand you have your needs, but if you don't want to adopt these and don't want to align with them, it's okay. And that actually saved the company money, because at the end of the day, when you have the wrong fit or wrong hire, you spend more money, at least 1.5 to 3 times more money to try and, transition out, find a new person, etc. So that over the years saved, the estimate was about $100 million in just paying people to quit. And then also hiring, firing based on purpose and values.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah. And I think we talked about this before as well, and you look at a big industrial type of business, or a mine, and you mentioned that earlier, you've got people, the blue collar worker, a lot of them, they don't go to work feeling that, they're totally aligned with this business, so a lot of times it's just survival. It is, they've got a job and it's really tough. I started working as an underground miner, and, you work 12-hour shifts, and you work 1 week day shift, next week night shift. Life then revolves, that is your life, and you do not think about values of the company, and I also grew up in a time when, culture wasn't really something that anyone talked about. You survive. You just your paycheck, and I want to see the world where that's different. I want to see a world where we can take a white collar, light blue and blue collar organization with union structures and all the difficulty around that, and get to the point where people love coming to work and they love working for the organization, because it is something that they are proud to say that they're part of. It's not easy. This is not a simple solution, and I love the idea about, paying people to leave. But then you overlay kind of what's happened in the last couple of years. There's such a shortage of people, so companies are in this dire need to find individuals to just fill seats, and they're making their own choices, employing people that they shouldn't, but it's really just to get moving. So I don't know how to solve these complex long-term, and is it a long-term thing? Maybe you can tell me, is there like a shortcut? Is it something that we've missed?
I think that you hit it at the very end there. Do you want to think of life? Do we want to think of life and the organizations we run as a short-term gain or a long-term gain? And I think for those that are thinking short-term, they will make those decisions of, we need to lay off. These things are understandable. Companies need to make these hard choices. But are we keeping that long game in mind? And if we are, and especially I keep on going back to the world getting 2020, the great resignation is happening for a reason. Quiet quitting is happening for a reason. Acting your wage. I can go on and on of every freaking trend that's come up since then, right? But it's all pointing towards the same thing. People are more vocal. TikTok, hello. Like, people are vocal and being like really bold enough to say, I'm not going to take this anymore. And so as employers, are we going to say, oh, we're going to shut the door on that and say, and turn a blind eye, or we're going to actually embrace that and say, this is the way of the new world. And this is the future of work that's happening now. So if I'm looking for short-term gain versus long-term gain, I need to make different decisions. And for me, from what I've seen, those companies out there that have really pivoted so well, I mean, Patagonia has been a poster child of everyone showing up. They're not just selling clothes. You remember that the full-page article they put out and said, advertisement saying, do not buy this jacket because we are here for the earth. That bold about their set. Airbnb has been killing it in their space, that everyone comes up, everyone shows up with that feeling, of having that purpose, frontliners as well. So I think that we have turned the corner on playing the long-term game. How do we value people as assets, knowing that they can not just provide a return on investment that we've seen, but also a ripple of impact. And that's where the purpose comes in, because those come hand in hand. We need to make the money, yes, but we also know that we have, as leaders, want to be creating the environment so people can make their ripple of impact too.
Yeah, that is so good, and it's maybe, you've seen so much in the world of digital and how things have evolved, and platform. And, this whole thing about being more connected makes people more disconnected, so I've seen that as well, I've actually gone through the era where we started getting emails for the first time. As a supervisor, you suddenly had to send emails. And I've seen how that took people out of the world of talking to their employees, just because suddenly they've now got to sit and type in emails that they don't know where even to start with that stuff. So, but I see that more today, and it's like on a rapid speed at the moment, where you see people going out to dinner and the family are 5 and, they're all sitting on their devices. No one's talking to one another. So more connected, but more disconnected from one another, from relationships, from the conversations that we should be having. So, I'd love to understand from your perspective, the digital age has hit us so fast and things are rapidly evolving and people are warning us against AI and, all these things. What do you see in that space? What are you worried about, and what should we be cautious about?
Yeah, it's such a timely question, because we just had, ChatGPT blow up in the last couple months. I mean, more people adopted that more like than TikTok, than, most of the things that like Zoom. It's crazy in 2 months. And sometimes that jars us because we're like, whoa, if that can happen so quickly, what's going to happen next year? And I think these are all, real valid questions. But I think the same thing happened when let's just say like the telephone wasn't invented. I think people were just like, wait a second, why do I need a telephone when I can go out my door and walk down the street and talk to my neighbor? No, thank you. Or some people just like gravitate toward it. And now, we can't even talk to each other in the same room. So I think whenever technology comes, and we'll keep on seeing stuff that we've never imagined, the biggest thing is for us to go inward. It's just another tool. It's just another tool in the toolbox. Has the telephone impacted our lives forever? Has the internet? Yeah, for sure. We will have so many more tools that come up, but then it becomes, what is my personal choice? What are my personal values about it? If I'm in a family, if I'm in a team, what are our values about this? How do we choose to actually communicate and connect, knowing it's worse than smoking a pack of cigarettes to be isolated and be staring at our screen every day? So that's where I think we have to have another layer of communication and consciousness with each other, and being able to say, this is how we're going to operate, and for these reasons, and not kind of like shoveling it down their throat and say, this is how we have to do it. It's more like, this is why. If we want to succeed in this company, if we want to, flourish as a family, that kind of thing, people want to understand.
Do you think that we actually talk enough about that in society? Because my sense is we don't. I look at the conversations in families, and you see how many families just give kids devices to quieten them down, or to. Do you think as a society we talk about this stuff enough?
I think the short answer is no. But I think, like my brother likes to say, don't let a good pandemic go to waste. And I think people have great resignation from a workplace standpoint is the great indication to show people have been thinking. People actually been reflecting. And I think the key now, and clearly you're in this space in the mind and the heart, is to actually open up these conversations, put these dialogues out there in a way that we have never before, because we can. More people are willing to listen and actually cross the line of where they were before than before. Going back to that, since we started this conversation off with, like, people want to be heard, listened to, and understood. If you open that space, we've seen in every communities around the world, they will open up to that, with that sense of vulnerability, with that sense of, oh, this is where something can belong, because they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So how do we create those spaces? Number one is with that dialogue, and doing it with psychological safety. I don't know if I've been hearing this term a lot, but especially in the workplace, you ask these questions without people feeling that, oh no, am I going to be fired? Am I going to be reprimanded? Someone is like, no, we're in a safe space. I just want to learn. We're in this together. How can we do it? Acknowledging things aren't going to be perfect, but at least we're going to do this together.
Jenn, and how do you create a safe space in a work environment? I mean, especially inside of complex organizations, right? But how do you really create that safe space? And going back to this conversation now around digital, so many people, it's work from anywhere, work from home, remote workplaces. Can you really create a safe space with people over the screen?
Yeah, so I think now that we have this big, equation of what remote and virtual and hybrid is all about, those safe spaces are that much more complex. And that's, we're going to say, I'm going to go back to that place again, but that's where purpose and values are so important. Creating safe spaces is having a shared sense of values that people understand and can align to. So if one of the values is communicate with honesty and respect, let's just say, what does that actually mean? Does that mean when we're talking on Zoom or on video only? Does that mean we have 24 hours or 48 hours to return an email? What are those parameters? And being that specific, it becomes black and white. So someone that can't argue well, that's how I communicate, so therefore that's the way it should be. It's no, actually we have shared values and behaviors on how we want to live this particular value of communicating with honesty and respect. It creates more black and white in a very gray world. And we cannot, assume we know what everyone wants, but at least we're going to have more of a joint shared sense of this is what we're all going to be accountable for, not like a big brother, big sister kind of way. But what I think is really important, those two questions that we need to answer right now is, what's in it for me and what's in it for all? And from that, you can create values and behaviors where people can understand, oh, this is why we're doing it. It's for me and for the team.
I think that's what I heard and what you were saying is, once you have that shared vision and these values are in place, people are so given by those values that vision just becomes so part of who they are as a collective. You're collectively working towards something and the fulfillment of that something. So I see so much value in that, not only in large organizations, but small organizations, even if it's 3-person teams, because we have lots of listeners that vary from, obviously, because of his background, to more of the creators have 1 or 2 people on their team, but it's equally as important despite the size of your organization.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I think it's a great point that you're bringing up this. It doesn't really matter what the size is of, what we're talking about. It could be a family of 4 or a mining company of 20,000. I think the biggest thing right now, they'll be challenged or daunted by these complexities and just create and carve out what we could be successful at creating in that real sense of community, in that sense of alignment and belonging. And we can all start doing that just literally today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're talking about that, we as society have got some really big challenges that we need to solve. And, those lie, the solutions lie in a conversation at the intersection between government, community, companies. Somewhere there's going to be some answers to and I think technology is another element that gets thrown in there, because something like climate change is not something that companies can solve or governments can solve by themselves. You look at the challenges we sit with at the moment with resource efficiency. We are transitioning our energy sectors around the world to become more green, but by virtue of doing that, we need so many more mines to open and more metal, because we need to transition from coal-fired stations to windmills and to solar farms, and they all need to be made and built, and it's all metals. But then in the flip side, we've got society that we've got a spending of our resources habits that are just shocking. How many people have got mobile phones in their drawers, that you don't recycle them, and computers. And so that type of conversation, so we're talking about a company or inside a community, but how do you think we should start those high level, multi-generational, but also multi-sectoral type of conversations that need to be had so that we can come up with these solutions? Because honestly, it cannot be solved by either one of those by themselves.
That's right. The timeliness again of this conversation, I was just having a conversation yesterday about this, because someone was talking about how they were getting stuck because of their own senses of fear or blockages of why they couldn't progress in their own sense of purpose. It was about climate change. And the irony was that her same blockage was the same blockage that was happening for society. And she didn't see that. She thought it was within herself. But I think one of the things to really connect is that sense of self, of what's blocking us, and the sense of community, the sense of me and the we. And I think to be able to cross these very complex, sometimes walls that come up between us, knowing it has to be collaborative, knowing we have to cross these lines to be able to create these solutions, is to actually present it in a way, and this is going to sound weird, in a very selfish, self-serving way to that person. Because someone that might maybe conceptually believe in climate change, at the end of the day, look, I need to pay my bills. I got a new car on my mind. I got a new phone I want to get. But at the end of the day, it's it's cool, but I got my life, so it's kind of how do we break that down and say, no, actually, this is for you, and not making them feel guilty, but actually say, and you could be part of it by doing in these everyday things that you need to do, and add to, what we need to do as a solution for this. So it's kind of turning it around and making it all about them. But that's the Trojan horse of saying it's all about you, because this is the way that we're going to be able to impact in that greater way with that higher purpose. So I think that's the kind of conversations that we need to invite. We saw at Davos, they're all admitting, look, this is very complicated. We need collaboration. It's yeah, we've known that. So how do we actually do it so that people get up off their butt and actually make some changes and act? And unfortunately, sometimes it is putting up that mirror and say, this is actually for you, and then they're for us.
That is so good, because I think part of the challenge sometimes is when you have activism and, we've got these people going out, we're going to solve the climate change thing. It actually makes a big part of our society just sit down and watch and not get in action and say, well, I can be part of that. Because a lot of people don't want to be out there, chaining themselves to paintings and do all those type of things. They just want to survive during the day. But if we can get the conversation at the level where every single person in this world can play a role, you don't need to be an activist, chaining yourself to stuff. You can actually be just a normal person. And instead of keeping your batteries in your drawer, just take them out and recycle them every day. Every time you use them, just recycle them. Or, maybe go out and don't buy the plastic bag, maybe recycle basic things. So small steps that can be taken by every single person in this world that will help us become more resource efficient so that we don't use as much as we do, because we are on a path of just destruction with the amount of things that we use. And so we need to find different ways. So I think you're right. It is the self-conversation, but then it's also, let's not make this a big thing that others need to go and solve for us. Every single one of us can play a massive role in this.
Yeah, totally. And you're right. It's those everyday things that we don't think about, But if we just actually open that little door to say, this is the everyday stuff that you can do differently. And because I think people are just so open to like, what does it mean to, live in today's world, knowing things that they've changed so much since 2020 BC before COVID, then they actually understand like that battery thing will become a habit because it's like, oh, yeah, this is like 2 seconds of my time, or, oh, this is helping, the earth by X, Y, and Z metrics, or whatever it is that we can share in terms of education. But I think that inward thing is like making sure people like, hey, this is about you and we want you to flourish. And these are the reasons why. And when they connect their own purpose to it, they're like, yeah, I actually do care about the world. I actually do care about the earth. Then it becomes, and then they kind of adopt it within themselves, and that becomes a daily habit.
I think the thing I love so much that you said, Jen, is like, so often we talk about these things, it's like me and them, or us and them. It's right and wrong. And actually all of that's super irrelevant because it is a collective, and we're just looking at it. How can we collectively work together towards something that needs to be achieved? Not even that we want to achieve, but needs to be achieved. So I really like that approach. And I want to, obviously we're coming up on time here, but you referenced 2020 a lot. It was a very interesting time. And I know that was when you were also writing your book. And so I'd love your insights on what was that experience writing about Beyond Happiness during this period of time?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's like total PTSD, but no, I mean, it's probably one of the hardest things I can ever recollect in my life without realizing. I knew the book was going to be hard to write, but then 2020 happened, so it was just like 10x of the challenge. If you can imagine, I signed the contract in January 2020, and then we all lived through that, right? Like every week, new headline would come up of how the world has changed. And so the outline I had, I was like, all right, this is shit. And then so I was like, I have to do something new. Yeah. So all that stuff is like, doesn't matter anymore. The world's changed, So I restarted like, I don't know, 20, 30 times. And then as I said, I'm sure like some of you all know, like my co-founder passed away at the end of 2020. And I realized, like that was just a huge reminder. Everyone had some sort of trauma in their life, some sort of loss, some sort of grief. And it didn't have to be a human being. It could have been a loss of hope, or a loss of a friend, or a loss of a job. I just realized that was where I was writing in. We all have suffered through something that has been hard. And that whole thing about just always remember someone is fighting a battle you never know about. It was just in my head the whole time. So that's how the book came out, was with that different context in mind. And that's why in the end, the title Beyond Happiness came at the very end, because it was more than that. It was not about those highs and lows that we talked about. It's actually embracing those things in our lives, asking grief to sit with us and actually have a meaningful conversation with it, and knowing that that's going to be a part of our day-to-days and levels and senses of fulfillment. So it was definitely one of the hardest things I had to go through to try and understand and process it all, but be able to communicate in a way, but with the sense of hope that there is this now real opportunity to, again, don't let a good pandemic go to waste because of all these things that we're having in this conversation itself. There are changes, and especially the changes within our own being, are so fundamental going forward for us.
Yeah. And when you talk about in the book, and I'd like you to speak about this a little bit, because I feel like everything you just said really leads to that, tending to your greenhouse. What does that really mean? And why is that so important?
Yeah, so I brought up the metaphor of greenhouse. Just zooming out a bit, like some of the scientific levers of happiness is having a sense of autonomy or control, and having a sense of progress. There's two things, but the other ones are having connectedness, meaningful connections, and having a purpose. But those two things we lost, during COVID. We lost a sense of control. We lost a sense of progress. We were all kind of like stuck. So I brought in that greenhouse metaphor because what do we want? If we can't even touch the word happiness, we couldn't for a good long time. we all do want to grow. So the greenhouse metaphor came about because my co-founder and I used to talk about, as leaders, we want to grow greenhouses, build the conditions so that others can grow. That's our job. But what was forgotten in that whole belief, and what I realized during the writing of the book, is that we forget to nurture our greenhouse first, or at least in parallel. And it's that whole metaphor of like when you're in a plane, oxygen mask, put it on, like, but we forgot, because we didn't fly for like freaking 3 years or whatever. But, that is now the reminder in a more, with a more positive spin to it, is like, we are all greenhouses too. And so by nurturing our own greenhouse as leaders is so important to not forsake yourself, as moms, as like putting all those hats on and what you had to do, homeschooling and working at the same time. Like, take those moments to try and understand what it is that nurtures your own personal greenhouse. Because someone's meditation is different from, another's cup of tea from like a walk in the park. It's like, take the time to test what truly nurtures your own greenhouse, as you know that, you cannot serve from a depleted tank. And, how do we fulfill others if we're not even filled within ourselves? So that was more of the reminder of, be careful and be very intentional about tending your own greenhouse.
So one of the things that I'm super present to right now is, you're right. When you came onto the conversation, one of the things you said is people sometimes have this like filter or bias that you're just going to be all smiles and all happy.
Yeah.
But you're also just super real. And for me, that tending to your greenhouse is that realism that we all need to deal with every single day, because life is hard, and there's the best happy moments, but life does get really difficult sometimes. It's important to take care of yourself so that you can take care of everybody else in your life.
Totally. One of the things I'm reminded of, because like we started this conversation about what's success and happiness, and I'm a big Maya Angelou fan, and one of the things she said was really cool about, we can all hope to shoot for the stars. That's being ambitious, but really shooting for the desiring to impact the heart is really wise. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where a big part of this tending and nurturing your own greenhouses is like, where does your heart lie in all of this? And therefore how you want to impact others in their hearts as well. But just thought that came into my head.
No, it's so important. And that's definitely where, I've shared with you from the beginning, impact for me is really important. But you're right, it is a very daunting thing if you look at, I'm going to change the world. But if you can change it one heart at a time, then that makes the biggest amount of progress in society and in communities. So what is next for you with Beyond Happiness? What is really next for Jenn Lim? I mean, you've obviously really mastered this and you're constantly deepening it. So what's next?
Yeah. So like, what's beyond? I don't know. Like, I believe what I've actually learned most in the last 2 years is that I am at a new beginning of a beginner's mindset. Because for so long, I was like, I did X, Y, and Z to get here. So therefore I need to hold on to that and make sure I never let that go. Otherwise, I'm going to lose everything I've gained, as a human being, as successful. But that didn't even mean that much. When I realized, like, every single day I have a chance to learn something new, and like every new idea, like just having that beginner's mindset has really changed my view on what could be next, because I no longer have to try and predict it. I just need to be present and conscious and aware of it, and receive it and be there to like, we didn't talk about my own purpose, but like really being the light within me to help connect the other lights around me in meaningful ways.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, really is beautiful. And is that what your purpose is?
Yeah. Get back to your question from a half an hour ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think but for me, that's a perfect evolution of the conversation today, Jenn, and really appreciate your time and authenticity and working through things, because as you saw, we're working through what does it mean and how do we implement it and how do organizations implement it. So appreciate not only everything you provided to listeners, but also to us personally and in the areas that we work inside of.
Thank you. I love your, like, you're doing this and you're having these conversations. I'm super excited for you as to where it goes. So if I can serve my purpose, let me know how I can light yours and light your lights in your journey.